Welcome back to Mastering Change in Minutes, where we're going to be exploring different types of tools that you can include in your operation as you navigate change. It really depends on what parts of your organization are changing and the workforce that you have. Utilize these tools to begin your initiative so that they're not clunky, so you don't lose people along the way. The one we're going to be talking about today is an important one where we can really identify the stakeholders, and that's called the Stakeholder Analysis. In this, we're going to be identifying the needs and power and interests of those who are affected by the change. And really what this is going to be doing is creating a plan for us on communication based on their level of influence and level of interest. And then we don't have to overdo it in areas that don't matter, and we can spend more time in the areas of impact. Now, how we want to do this is we're going to identify our stakeholders. And how you do this is assessing their influence and interests and placing them on this 4-quadrant grid. Now, it's important to understand the difference between influence and interest. So influence is how much power does this stakeholder have? And I want you to think about power in different ways. So power can be position, right? So like the big dog, the big boss. Power can be the person that those naturally follow. Power can be those who meddle in other departments or have that way of stirring the pot. That can also be a power because it can be toxic. What does power look like to you in the organization before you even start identifying stakeholders? Really identify what are the behaviors of power in your stakeholders. And then I want you to also identify the behaviors of those interested. So that's basically how much do they care about this change? There's some people where it's like, okay, whatever, we're changing softwares. And then there's people that have a long change curve, and changing softwares is going to take their whole head out of the game for a couple months. They're going to resist it every point of the way. I've even had people leave in our organization because of a software change. It just was too much. And again, is it people that you want to keep, or is it people that maybe it's time to go? So identifying that early will help with communication so you can tend to their change curve and make it a little faster. So identify the behaviors of what does influence or that power mean to your organization, and then the interest level. So how much individuals care about the change. And then you want to plot on the grid. In the bottom left corner is going to be your bystanders. It means keep them informed, but they have low influence, they have low interest, they kind of just go with the flow. And those are always sweet to have. Then you move across influence to the higher influence. So these are the people that have more power based on position, based on who follows them, based on maybe the meddling that they might do around your organization. And these are your blockers. So you need to engage them. You need to get them on board, get their voice heard so that you have buy-in. And then they will be speaking the same message as you. Have you ever had that change where everyone says they're on board in a meeting, and then you go out and you start rolling it out, and then there's this, and then there's this, and then there's gossiping, and then there's all this stuff that comes out that should have never came out against the change? That's because you didn't address the blockers. These are the people who have influence and will do that meddling or gossiping or be against the change because you never got their buy-in. And we'll talk about in future episodes about how we get buy-in, but engagement is required in this one. So let's move to the top squares. These are the ones that have a little bit more higher interest. So in the top left, it means there's low influence, that low power, but they have high interest in the change. These are the listeners. They're listening to what you're saying. They're reading the emails. They're even listening to people's behaviors and conversations about it. So you want to make sure that you address the concerns because they might be actually low influence now, but they might get enough information from listening to be a higher influence later to others, like clearing up communication or misconceptions. And then the top right is going to be your key drivers in change. So you want to involve these people in strongly because they have power, or people naturally follow them, and they have high interest with it. So they're going to have a passion and energy around it that people want to follow. So once you plot people in these 4 quadrants based on influence and interest, are they a bystander, a blocker, a listener, or a driver? I want you to prioritize and map the engagement that you're going to do with each quadrant. So for example, high influence and high interest, you want consistent engagement. You even maybe want them in the meetings, or you want some quotes from them, or you want to really discuss some questions that they have about the change so that they can be the drivers outside of that meeting, outside the normal people driving change, kind of being an advocate for it. And then obviously when you get to the low interest, low influence, minimal updates, maybe an email or a video covering what's going on and the steps we're going to take to the change. And then you tailor your communication. So the first one is identify stakeholders and what is the behaviors that looks like for your organization. 2 is assess the influence and interest of all your employees affected by the change. And then 3, prioritize how are you going to engage, how are you going to communicate. And then 4 is tailor your communication accordingly. Doing this is going to get rid of the blockers and get them on board, move them to drivers. Doing this is going to get your listeners that have low influence to be informationally informed and actually have more higher influence. And you already see that the flow is a little bit more natural to get people on board with change. And when we identify this power and this interest early of the stakeholders affected by the change, we can take a more natural step in it that feels solution-based, that feels results-orientated. It feels like we're all on this together versus resistance against change or leaving people behind. This should be a collaborative effort by leadership and not just an HR function, because they will give insights and that cross-department view and perspective of what stakeholders go through, maybe behind the scenes. Maybe HR or the main person driving this change isn't seeing all the behaviors. So getting a cross-department view and perspective on these stakeholders is also going to be important as you roll this out. I would say this whole practice probably takes only about a half hour, depending on the magnitude of change and how many people it covers, and it will help you in this specific situation. Now, say a year from now, we go through another big change and we need to do this analysis again. I want you to do the analysis again. We like to put people in buckets, and people change, people evolve. You'll have people that maybe had low interests before because they'll just do what the boss is telling me. They pay me to be here and that's what I'll do. But maybe now that the change is happening a year from now, they have more interest in it. Maybe people are naturally now following them. So you want to make sure that you're keeping a pulse in real time and not putting people in buckets from history. It helps with identifying trends of behavior, but people evolve, people change, so they could be in a different box. Or something could have happened to them and they were slighted and they actually regress and move backwards and become a blocker. So doing real-time stakeholder analysis is also going to be important as you roll out change. Make sure you stick around and subscribe for future change management tools.